I've always had good jobs. I've been lucky that way, but I had the only aviation command, I guess, in the Army at the time, which I was thoroughly enjoying. And we were developing these things. It was interesting, never been done before. But I got this call one day and wanted to know how I would like a tour in Washington. And I said, thank you, but no thank you, because that was the last place I wanted to go. Well, you got 2 weeks to get up here in. And I said, for what? So just get up here. So I went up. I went into the Pentagon to the assignment branch, and a friend of mine was there. And he said, I got to take you on a trip. And I said, what? We got a car, and they took us over to the White House. I said, what are we doing over here? You'll find out. So we got into the east wing of the White House, and they took us up to the military aides office. And he was sitting at a desk, and his window faced out on the south lawn. And I'll never forget, he had a sign on the wall behind his desk. He says, I may not be right, but I'm the boss. So looking out there, and he says, can you land a helicopter out there? I said, yes, sir. I can put a half dozen of them out there if you want them. So you got the job. I said, what job? Well, you're going to be the presidential helicopter pilot. What it was, they wanted the thing done that saved the president's time, and it was really a good thing for him because he didn't get involved in the Washington traffic and all this stuff. We get him over to Washington National in about 3 minutes, or out to Andrews in a little bit longer than that. So it was a great thing. People say, well, wasn't that a waste of time to use a helicopter for a 3-minute flight? Well, it wasn't, because you save so much by doing that. In fact, the Washington police sure appreciated it. But that's the reason that we got into that, and there was no problem with it. There was no risk there. I mean, I flew every day under those same conditions in Fort Benning. This just happened to be the White House, which, as I told them, the helicopter don't really care. It'll do what it's supposed to do. They really wasn't quite sure how to go about this, and I had gone to all of our secret sites and this sort of thing and checked them out. I couldn't mark any of it on a map because it was all secret, so I had to know it in my head. And so I had done all that. So he had to go up to a country up by Gettysburg and vote. And I went in and got him and flew him up there landed him at this fire station out in the country where he voted. And he voted, and take him back to the White House. But the interesting thing about that trip, and I sure felt sorry for a woman, we landed in this cow pasture right behind the firehouse that they were voting in. And of course the news people were up there. And so when he voted and came in, there was cow piles all over the place out there. So this one newsy lady, she was there and trying to get up in and get a picture, and somebody knocked her down and she went in one of those piles, and then somebody stepped on her head. But I'm sitting up in the cockpit feeling sorry for her, can't do a thing for her. But that's the thing I remember about that poor woman. Nobody helped her. She was, those newsies, they're not too good to one another.
Mrs. Eisenhower did not like helicopters, did not like flying. And she also did not like smoking in the White House. But I was going from the East Wing to the West Wing, and I was smoking a cigarette, and as my fate would have it, the elevator opens up, and there stood Mrs. Eisenhower, who proceeded to give me some, I can't even quote the type of language that she told me about, no uncertain words, that I shouldn't be smoking. And she said, get rid of it. And I didn't know what in the world to do. And she said, eat it. So I put it in my mouth and spit on it, and I'm sucking on it. She jumps in. I'll tell Ike I'm sick and tired. I've told you people no smoking in this daggone White House. So she got in the elevator to go back upstairs to tell Ike. So I'm only telling you that part because about 2 trips later up to Camp David, I was coming out of the aircraft, and the president was standing there, and I walked around. He said, smoked any cigarettes lately, Willie? And I couldn't help. I was so embarrassed, but I had to laugh. I said, no, sir. I decided I'm going to quit smoking. I said, just to be safe.
The reason we got the big twin-engine helicopter was the fact that we never flew Eisenhower at night because it was a single-engine helicopter. And if an engine quits on a helicopter, it comes down 2,000 feet a minute, so that doesn't give you much time at night to find a landing area. So President Kennedy came into Andrews one night and he told the Secret Service, he said, I want to use the helicopter to go back to the White House. They said, sir, we don't fly the helicopter at night. He said, I want to use the helicopter. So he did use the helicopter, and panic hit they went out and found out that Sikorsky had a nice twin-engine helicopter, which is great for flying at night because if one engine quits, you have the other one. So that was the evolution of the helicopters from a single-engine helicopter into the multi-engine helicopter.
I enjoyed working with the Kennedys when they'd go to Hyannisport in the summertime. We'd follow, and we'd be on call over at Air Force at the Otis Air Force Base. When I was off duty, I'd go over to the compound where they lived and get in touch with the Secret Service and say, now what are you going to do today? Well, we're taking the First Lady out, or she's going boating, sailing, and we're following. I can remember one day when Mrs. Kennedy got stuck on a sandbar. Well, we'd all roll up our trousers so we could walk around and pull her off the sandbar, and we'd huff and puff, and it might have been a hot day. And she said, would you fellas like a cold beer? And we'd look at each other and say, I don't think we ought to be drinking with the president's wife.
People cared for you. They looked out after you in the Eisenhower and the Kennedy administration to see if everything's all right and ask you if everything's all right. Whereas in the Johnson administration, no. You sat in that helicopter on the ramp 100 feet from an air-conditioned Secret Service trailer, and you couldn't go in there except to relieve yourself. He did not want to see military presence on a ramp. Why, I don't know. And you would sit out there, and it's hot, you know, because you have that greenhouse effect with the windows in the helicopter. And all of a sudden you hear that on a Secret Service net, he's coming towards the helicopter in the golf cart. Now you jump up, you tighten up your tie, you sit in the cockpit where it's 20 degrees more than outside, and he would pull up right alongside the helicopter and look at you and then turn around and drive away, as if to say, you better be ready if I wanted to go.
On the other hand, his wife, Lady Bird, was a very nice lady, very polite. I happened to be from Alabama. Lady Bird Johnson was from Alabama. She found that out, and consequently, when I was at the ranch, ran a lot of errands for her.
I guess of all the presidents, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford that I flew for, I enjoyed my time with President Nixon the most. They were very caring, looking after the people that flew with them. We used to fly out to, for instance, Grand Cay out in the Bahamas. They had a friend that owned a villa out there that they'd go out and stay weekends out there. And we had a little house down on the beach where the Secret Service, where we landed the helicopter, and to stand by at down there in a little house down there where we ate and slept. And every evening, either one or both, President Nixon or Mrs. Nixon, one of them or both of them usually came down to ask the Secret Service and the helicopter crew if we needed anything, food or whatever, but we was eating lobster and stuff like that, and you couldn't do much better than that anyway. But it was a good ride, yeah. I enjoyed probably the Nixon years the best of all of them. President Ford, his height was such that when he would board the aircraft, the helicopter, sometimes he didn't duck far enough and his head would strike the top part of the doorway there. And he'd ouch a couple times, but never serious injury or nothing, but just bump his head. And I know it had to hurt because I bumped mine there a couple times too.
But I did feel that at that time when I left there, I was 41 years old. And that's the time, it's time to start thinking about what you want your life to be. Up until then, I still didn't worry about it, but I did want some time with the family and to do things that we wanted to do. Now the time I was up there, I got 1 5-day leave. And my wife and I went to the beach. We stayed one night and they called me back. That's the only vacation I ever got up there. And I couldn't get away from them. I had a boat. And I thought I'd get out on the boat in the Potomac or somewhere, and they couldn't find me. Well, next thing I knew, I was out there, and here come the Coast Guard after me. Called the White House. Back I went. I'd get on a highway patrol would stop me and call the White House. it's one of those jobs that you just, you're on duty all the time, which is fine. I accepted that. But when you get to the end of it, it's time to leave it. It's not fair to your family to stay there. And there's other people can do it. They're still doing it. And I haven't been there in a long time.